the difference.
The second thing you mentioned was the cost with the incineration. What's the problem with the cost there?
Incinerators are extremely costly to operate. And the case of the City of Detroit incinerator is probably the classic case of an extremely costly facility. And this is probably the area that I've spent the most time in sort of looking at, because unfortunately it's probably the way of talking to city officials the best in terms of their concerns. So it may be the best way to actually convince them to close the facility down. If you just look at in terms of the cost to residents, the contractual arrangement between the Greater Detroit Resource Recovery Authority, GIDRA, and the City of Detroit is that basically the City of Detroit, actually the residents of the City of Detroit through their taxes, or now a special garbage fee that's been implemented, by contractual arrangement arranged by the city, they have to pay for whatever the difference is between the cost of operating the facility and any revenues that they may take in by any other means. And that means regardless, no matter what happens, they have to pay the difference. And what that has meant is over the last 5 or 6 years that I've been tracking this, is that the cost per ton, if you work it out to the cost per ton to residents, has actually been increasing over the last several years. When I first started looking at this about 6 years ago, the cost per ton to the residents of the City of Detroit was around $120 to $125 per ton. If you compare that to some of the suburban areas that don't use an incinerator, their cost per ton is around $30, $35 per ton. 5 years ago, it was about 4 times as much as the surrounding suburbs. As various problems with the incinerator have come up, the cost per ton has been increasing, and so the last year that I looked at it, which was for the statistics for 2005, the cost per ton was over $170 per ton to the residents of the City of Detroit. And if the part of the reason why that's complicated is because of, again, it goes back to this contractual arrangement, where the residents of the City of Detroit are responsible for paying the difference between the cost of operation and whatever revenues come in, no matter what. No matter what problem happens or anything, they are responsible for paying. So what has happened is and this sort of has to go back a little bit into the history. In the mid-'80s, the state of Michigan promoted incineration as an alternative to landfills. And that was under Governor Blanchard. So that was back in the mid-'80s. After Governor Engler was elected, he basically threw out the policy that Governor Blanchard had originally implemented, the state solid waste policy that was made official in the late '80s. He basically, when Governor Engler came into office, he basically ignored that policy, and it's probably not such. It's probably a good thing that he did, actually, because the policy under Governor Blanchard would have been that by 2005, 40% of all the trash of the city, or excuse me, 40% of all the trash of the state of Michigan would have been burned in incinerators, which would have been devastating to public health in the state of Michigan. What ended up happening instead was that Governor Engler basically ignored that policy entirely and gave all kinds of breaks to the landfill industry. So what happened is that the cost of landfilling trash plummeted to the point where landfill prices now, if you have a fairly large contract like what the City of Detroit would have, the price per ton for dumping trash in a landfill is on the order of about $10 to $12 per ton. what is referred to as the tipping fee. You know, how much you have to pay per ton when you show up at the gate of the landfill. And there's other costs associated with transportation and so forth, but that's the tipping fee. So what happened is that the price per ton at a landfill plummeted, and that means that the Detroit Incinerator couldn't compete at all with these landfill prices. And that was a direct result of state policy that was put into place by Governor Engler. And so all the suburbs then started pursuing landfill contracts instead of using the Detroit Incinerator. Well, what the Detroit Incinerator had to do is that if it wanted to, it needed to attract more waste to the facility. And because also part of their contractual arrangement is that they have, the public authority basically under its contract to the operator of the facility, which is called Michigan Waste Energy, which is a subsidiary of a national company called Covanta, that actually has the people who run the facility on a daily basis. Their contract with them says that they will provide 780,000 tons of trash per year, or if they don't provide that, they will take a financial penalty for not providing enough trash. That's part of their contract. So they actually have a financial incentive to provide more trash. Well, the city of Detroit doesn't even generate that much trash, so they have to go out in order to be able to find more trash. So when they contracted with city management, which is the subsidiary of Waste Management, to run their transfer stations in the city of Detroit, as part of that contract, they also agreed to take in trash from other cities that Waste Management collects that trash for. So the waste from the city of Hamtramck, from the east side of Dearborn, from Harper Woods, from Highland Park, or no, not Highland Park, excuse me, Highland Park is not part of it. It's another interesting historical issue is with Highland Park. But so these other suburban cities send their trash to the Detroit Incinerator, but Waste Management, through its subsidiary City Management, is only paying $10.45 per ton to have that trash burned at the facility. And so in effect, what has happened is that the residents of the city of Detroit have to pay a much higher price per ton in order to subsidize the burning of suburban trash, in order to meet this contractual requirement of having 780,000 tons per year, which they've almost never met that 780,000 tons per year. The only year that I know that they actually met that rate was in 2005 and perhaps 2006, and that was under an unusual short-term situation in which all of the communities of southeast Oakland County had a contract with Waste Management, and for those 2 years, 2005 and 2006, they sent the trash from those communities to the Detroit Incinerator, and that was at the $10.45 per ton. And these, some fairly well-off communities in southeast Oakland County. The largest of those communities is the SACRA, the Southeast Oakland County Resource Recovery Authority communities. The largest communities in that are Royal Oak and Troy. And so they were sending all of their trash, about 100,000 tons per year, to the Detroit Incinerator at a rate of $10.45 per ton, as the revenue that the GIDRA was taking in from that under the contract with city management. So the residents of Detroit were subsidizing the wealthy communities of southeast Oakland County in the disposal of their trash. But what ended up happening is that contract ended because a landfill, actually in northwestern Washtenaw County, underbid that $10.45 per ton price. We don't know exactly, but we think it was about $9 per ton. And so they basically, so that the Detroit Incinerator lost this source of trash from southeast Oakland County because a landfill underbid their $10.45 per ton price.
But did that benefit the city in terms of the